My name is Ali Hasnain. I'm an assistant professor of economics here, and I'm the director of the Pakistan 100 initiative. The initiative is our effort to try and get policy debates going among citizens. We find that there isn't enough texture to the debates that we find typically from 8 p.m. onwards on your TV screens. And so getting academics and policy experts with substantial experience over has two purposes. One is to have us as citizens think about this more, and we're going to be recording this and putting it up for a wider audience than what we have here. And then the other is to get some of you who are thinking of development careers to consider different niches that you can explore as you go. So very honored to have Agha Ali Akram, who is going to moderate this session. He's a fellow colleague at the Department of Economics here. To his left, we have Steve Davies, who is a senior research fellow at IFPRI. He's had sort of a wide range of experiences here. He was involved with sort of a grant making exercise that was held in conjunction with the Planning Commission years ago. So he has a sort of very, very long set of experiences here in Pakistan. To his left is Dr. Pervaiz Amir, who is on the Prime Minister's Task Force on Climate Change and on the Technical Advisory Panel of the Ministry of Environment. He's also on the Board of Directors for Hisar and the Pakistan Water Partnership. To his left is Dr. Zehra Waheed, who is an assistant professor at the business school. Her current research focuses on urban waste management and the existence of informal waste networks and knowledge sharing that leads towards integrated urban waste management systems. So with that, thank you all for coming, and over to you, Ali.
All right, well, Ali, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for this opportunity to get some wonderful minds together to talk about water. Back in, I think it was 2005 or 6, when this World Bank report came out. It said it was titled Pakistan's Water Economy Running Dry. And I think that set this slow panic going in academic and development circles. And that has been echoing around, that sort of mild panic, and that has now spilt over into the public domain, into the common imagination, to the point where we are crowdfunding not one but 2 dams currently, which is very strange. It's at once funny and tragic and brave, and we'll see what happens with it. But the point is that this is clearly, water is one of those issues that's caught the imagination right now, and there's these very panicky headlines that we read, running out of water. We'll be out of water in 2025. I know that this is floating around, right? It's kind of a strange thing to say, but it's floating around and there's panic. So what we thought we'd do is we'd kind of take a step back and talk about water in a relaxed, calm, rational kind of way. I'm not one of the panicked people, not yet at least. I think there's a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of good things that we can do still. So with that, let's turn to our panel. So what I was thinking of doing was that we could, my poor panel, I annoyed them by sending this huge list of questions to them about a week ago, and I said, please have thoughts on all of these questions. And they've very, very kindly done that. So what I'll do is that I'll prompt you with some questions, and we could just have a conversation going. And then after a little bit, we could perhaps have the audience jump in with questions. So I'll open it to the audience in a bit. But there are some questions that I really want to get to. So let's start in the way, okay, the way I'm thinking of organizing this is starting at sort of a macro sector level, intersectoral allocation. How do we get that right? Then moving down to one of the sectors, to agriculture, what are the issues there, challenges there, and how do we try and address them? And then to another sector, which is urban water, and again, what are the challenges there and what do we do? And then we'll kind of finish off with some big picture thoughts from our panelists. So with that, let's start at the sort of big picture, the macro intersectoral allocation. So the first question I kind of wanted to pose to my panel was, it's phrased in a way to get a response from you guys. Is the current water split between our sectors efficient? What do you guys think?
Just a suggestion. Prior to talking about the sectoral split, if we can take a further step back, to actually see, because the topic was a bit about where we'll stand in 2047, to understand as a holistic system not just Pakistan itself, we're part of a bigger system as well. Dr. Pervaiz and I were talking about the fact that we tend to take things in bits and pieces, even within Pakistan, in terms of sectors, in terms of institutions, in terms of initiatives. We're also doing that when we're talking about Pakistan on its own. So in 2047, I'll just come to that. Before that, we need to understand that this entire issue is not just about water. It is about fresh water. So as an entire system, we are embedded within the Himalayan system. And there are three sources from where we get our fresh water. One is the aquifers that we have. For example, the Indus Basin, right up till Ganges, we all share a single aquifer at the bottom. One of those taglines that when you were invited here for this talk was the fact that Lahore's the aquifer beneath Lahore is being, the water is being extracted far more faster than it can be, what do you call that? Replenished, all right? That is the aquifer that I'm talking about. So we have aquifers, so that's clean water from below, which has taken millions of years to accumulate there. 1. 2, rainfall. 3, glacial melt, all right? Now, as opposed to the Ganges and also the systems, the river systems, basins in east of India, when we're talking about Bangladesh, those tend to be more reliant on rainfall. As opposed to them, that's the same for Nepal as well. The systems over here that we have, which we refer to as, above the ground systems, let's call them. I'm not really a specialist at that. We tend to rely more on glacial melt as opposed to rainfall. So we have these three sources, but 2047 and the time around 2047 is very crucial because around 2045, a recent study by EC-MODE is a SARC-based organization, all the SARC member countries. They undertake research regarding the Himalayas. So as a byproduct of their collective research over the last 3 to 4 years has been a number of key findings. The ones pertinent to us actually say that between 2045 and 2050, right up till there, we are going to see a peak, a rise, a somewhat rise in the intake that we will get from glacial melt because of climate change. There's warming happening. But what happens at that point in time, so when we're talking about Pakistan turning 100, that is a crucial point in time because that is when it stops. Because there's an extent to which the glaciers will melt and the amount of water that we will get. So that's a key thing that we need to start thinking about. The sources of our water and what is happening around about the time. And you guys will be what? Round about my age by that time? Well, slightly older maybe. But that's going to happen in your lifetimes. And I'll be about 70-ish as well. I'll be around as well to see that. So the implications of not just how we manage the supply of this water, but also how we manage the demand. So when Ali is talking about sectoral demand, the huge, the big lion's share goes to agriculture, which is highly, highly inefficient. So I just wanted to start the conversation from there. So before we talk about sectoral division, we actually see what kind of water sources we're talking about. And then when we're talking about sectors, we're talking about the demand side. And, well, if we can take it from there.
No, absolutely. Very, very much appreciated. I mean, the fact is that the sources of water we have are, they have their own dynamics and their own science. And, getting a better understanding of that is critical in all of this. And very much my intent to begin with is that we look at not within sector, but between sectors. What do we, how do we get that water to which sector? So I wondered if it was... Sure.
I've been working on an economic model. This sort of actually just extends from the water resources. It incorporates water resources along with the economy, and it is part of this whole looking out to 2047 pack at 100 idea of things. What's the economy going to look like in 2047? And we did two things. We did one is the business as usual, and we just ran things out at the current growth rates in per capita income. And then we did a much higher one. And it turns out that actually Pakistan could, with appropriate management of water and other resources, could reach a much higher per capita income within 30 to 45 years. So that was the good news. We integrated a lot of the water the kinds of water that exist, the glacier melt, rainfall, and groundwater, and tried to integrate all of that as well. So I think it was a somewhat encouraging outcome. Lots of challenges. There's no shortage of challenges, and I think we'll get into those. But I guess the big picture on a couple sectoral things from that are, one is agriculture is going to have to, according to what we saw, take about 10% of its water out by 2047. Just, you do the math, it's pretty simple. If these other sectors like households and industry and services and environmental uses are all going to grow, then absolutely you're going to have it come from somewhere. So what we were seeing was something like a 10% reduction in agriculture's use of water. The second thing that I think is really important is that most of the water in agriculture goes into 4 major pretty low valued crops: wheat, rice, sugar cane, and cotton. That's 80% of the water that gets used in agriculture. Every one of those could be imported under certain conditions. There are lots of alternatives to spending all your water for those kinds of things. So I might come back to other points later on, but that would be my introductory big picture view of things.
I'd like to add to what Steve just said. We've done a lot of studies on the supply side of water. We have a very good handle on that. We've been doing that since 1947. Pakistan supply, we know, currently is around 141 million acre feet of water. And it's divided between surface water as well as groundwater. So very reasonably good. I mean, we understand that. Pakistan has not undertaken any studies on the demand side of water. The only study which I participated a year or two back is on Pakistan water sector, sectorial demand of water under different climate change scenarios with Dr. Zehra Waheed. That's the only piece of work which we could lay our hands down on that. It's not perfect. It is just a startup. I think Steve also used parts of it at time, but it's just a very start. So from your research point of view, for those who are interested in, that's the big topic, is water demand. And very rightly said that 90% of the water we use traditionally in agriculture. We use another 3-4% water in our domestic usage, drinking and that, and then there's some water for industry. We've further allocated water into 3 additional sectors. The upcoming sectors, one is going to be on e-flows, which is the environment. Your rivers are dying. Unless you give them water, you take care of those rivers, you're not going to go very far. The other thing is CPAC. CPAC is a big emerging, that's where we're putting $64 billion US. We'll probably make it to $102 billion US. So if you look at the foresight, that's where water will go. Parts of that water will go there. And then is on social development. You want to push everybody into the cities. Another 2047, when Steve and I come, if I'm around and Steve is around, we see it as 60-65% of you people living in urban areas. The demand, as you're related to income, very high. Demand for water is very high for domestic usage. You want pools, you have incomes. So this is the way it's going to happen. Imran Khan comes up and says, let's put up 10 billion trees. Trees also take water. We don't have any budget item where they go. Worldwide, we budget 30% of water for energy. Pakistan does not budget 1% of water for its energy. So you're going to see these conflicts and this push and pull. Where is that water going to come out? I tend to agree with Steve. It's going to come out of agriculture. And it's easier said than done. Very easy said. That water will be fought very hard. If you look at those people, if you look at your assemblies, 90% of people sitting are those who also have land. They do not allow you to touch that water, either whether it's surface water or irrigation water. So I think this is also going to emerge as an area of conflict, which we need to manage. So, a few comments here.
Is there any more quick comments on that, or do you think you?
I think we'll
Okay. I was just going to say, there's 2 things I picked up on. One is this idea of managing demand. Like, right now there's the panic seems to, whenever there's this crisis and thought of crisis, the first thing we turn to is, we've got to build dams, right? That's what we want. We want more water. And it's very easy for us to fall into that trap. But do you think, sorry, I say trap, that's a bit loaded, but it just means that, we don't have to always think of supply. It could be that we're not managing our demand very well. Part of that may have to, so there's two things I wanted to ask. One is, what can we do to focus more on managing our demand? But secondly, the things that you pointed out here just now about this intersectoral tension, the fact is that right now agriculture uses 97% of our water, something like 90%. 90%. It's a huge amount of water that it uses. Do we see a future where urban consumers can pay for that additional 10 percentage points that you, for example, said? Can we see a future where there's dare I say, a market? And I say dare I say because back in the early 90s, the World Bank had wanted to do this. They were pushing for a water market of sorts, and it fell apart and then transformed into something else. It was an institutional reform of some kind, but it's very difficult to get this market going. And so a couple of thoughts on, any thoughts on that?
I'd like to take a start on that, and then I leave it to Steve. 1994, John Mellor, some of the other very celebrated people, we participated in that study which you're referring to, is reforming irrigated agriculture of Pakistan. Pricing was one of the fundamentals in it, that how can you use pricing. It just came out on the papers. It never moved from the World Bank reports into the actual domain of reality. One issue is price is equal to marginal cost. That's the neoclassical, what you sort of think. That does not work in water theory. In practice, Chris Perry has shown that it simply doesn't work. I throw you into the desert, okay, for a few minutes, and it starts scorching heat. And then I ask you to use that formula, price is equal to marginal cost. What is the price of water in that situation? The price of water is infinite. It's infinite price. That's one of the reasons why we have a lot of difficulty in coming down and just putting it into numbers and just giving one flash out. If you look at your bottles which I am drinking, this is 70 rupees right now. The larger one, the bigger one is 70 rupees. You take this as a Coke bottle is 65 rupees. The bottle of Coke is 65, this is 70. Depending on where you're getting it, Lahore probably 70 because these guys are near to Nestle. If you go somewhere outside in Sust, near the border of China, this is about 90 to 100 rupees. Multiply that for an acre of feet, you know what we are talking about. So, pricing is going to be one of the major handles, in my opinion, by which you get start looking at demand management. I don't discount the reason for building. Dams are built for a totally different purpose. They have nothing to do with this. Dams provide national security. India has 4,500 dams. It is building 500 dams right now today. Pakistan only has 2 dams, and Pakistan is still struggling, as you're pointing out to the we're trying to go for. We are not going to go for 2 dams, we're going to go for actually 3 dams. This is what me and Steve, when we're coming out in the Supreme Court conference last week, we are fairly clear. And these are not new dams. This will not create new water. This will not store any new water. This is what we call replacement water. This is replacement water. You have 2 dams, Tarbela and Mangla. Those 2 dams, the combined capacity is around 12.6 million acre feet. They are vanishing very quickly. So what we are putting in now, that will just simply help extend the life of some of those and help us cater over there. Back to demand management a little bit. So water you store to regulate, that's your security. You have these tankies in your house. They serve a particular purpose, is water security and regulation. From one time we get 90% of our water, we get it in 90 days. Most of the water we get during monsoon. We have to carry over that water for the winter months, when right now no rains, So that's where we use particularly that water. Demand management, I think it's going to come out as a slow moving phase. It's very difficult to start putting prices. In theory, I agree with that tomorrow we will have a market and we will do what Murray-Darling Basin does, Colorado does, or how they've solved it in South Africa. In Pakistan, it's going to be very slow. There are markets. There are formal markets and there are informal markets for water. So when the people start, they say, oh, Pakistan doesn't. Pakistan has a very large market, water market. In agriculture, water is traded. Water is time and space dependent. I cannot shift it to other places. What is the price of that water? It is 1/4 the price of the total produce of wheat. It is 1/3 the total gross output of rice. If you want to work backwards, that's how you work backwards. What is the value and what is the price of water? That's the price of water. If you want to go for a surface water, it is sold at 1,200 rupees an hour, whatever the rates are for electricity. If you want to buy even irrigation water, it has a price. But it's not like Murray-Darling where you store it somewhere and it is not on call. It is not on demand from there. But at the lower level, at the lower tiers, it is sort of traded. It is worked out. So I think that's going to get more intense as water goes out of the circuit. Lastly, what I'd like to say is that I don't buy this report and this argument that Pakistan is going to run out of water. I'm very harsh, very critical about it. Look here, you start with a figure of 5,200, 5,300, whatever that number was in 1947. You divide it by the population of Pakistan at that time. You get a figure of, we get something like a very high figure, Pakistan has for now. After in 2018, you take that same figure and you divide it by today's population. So what's going to happen? It's going to come down drastically. The fault is not the water. The total water is almost the same. The fault lies in your population. So you say, Pakistan was a stressed country at that time. Now it's going to be a scarce country. That's the theory. And we have much more water than many other countries of the world. You go to Israel, you go to Jordan, you go to 20 other countries in the world. It is going to go back to how you manage that demand and the instruments you use for it. See, your take.
So I was just going to, Pervaiz mentioned the Colorado Basin in the U.S. as one where I think there is a very well-developed water market, and I think it provides what can be done in Pakistan and what probably can't be done in Pakistan. So but it's instructive at least. And basically every gallon of water in Colorado is owned by somebody. So if you put a pump in, you drill a tube well in your farm and you're 200 yards from a creek, that creek's water is actually owned by somebody else. And you may be pulling through the aquifer the water that's actually owned by somebody else. And so it's extreme, and so what happens, you get into a lawsuit, and they have a dedicated water court that fights over these things all the time, and they know basically exactly the whole layout of aquifers and surface water and all that kind of thing. So it's an expensive system, but it also is a market. And so what has happened in the last decade or 15 years is that urban utilities have purchased all the water from farmers. And it's easy, the value to them is 10 to 20 times what it is to a farmer. And so farmers get dried up in eastern Colorado when water is short, and it becomes a big political battle. But in the end of the day, the market is moving to supply the urban consumer first because their value is so much higher for the amount of water. They're willing to pay for these bottles of water and quite a bit more for the services that they require. So water markets can exist. They require a lot of investments. They require a lot of legal setups to get it right. So it's not simple to do, but it can be done. And we were talking earlier, it's a ways down the road in Pakistan, I think, from that kind of market. So I think there's some other things that we could talk about, but as a vision, it is possible, let's say that.
Zehra, did you want to
Just
jump in?
taking forward what Dr. Pervaiz was talking about a little while ago, in terms of saying, I agree with him, we probably won't run out of water. But he pointed out something very important, the denominator in the equation, which is giving you those drastic numbers, the population, increasing urbanization. The forecast that we had for 2050, we're likely to reach that by 2025. And increasing consumerism, that's backed up by higher incomes, a growing middle class. So a focus also needs to be, when we talk about the demand side, it is to do with what you consume and how you consume. And also on the other side, you must have heard about the circular economy, how goods and services are actually produced. That's a very important component of how you actually manage the demand for a commodity like water. Water is a commodity. And I agree, if the markets have not substantially grown, they will over here as well. But it's very important that we understand what constitutes consumer behavior, how that can be changed, for example, how you inculcate environmental responsibility into, everyday lives. So again, that is also an area that at a policy level we need to engage with, and I feel that's been missing altogether. And that doesn't just involve end consumers like you and me. It means industry, it means commercial use. It means the responsible disposal of the water that you have consumed and not just dumping it into your rivers and nalas or wherever you want to. So there's another side of the picture that needs to be incorporated into the wider narrative as well.
I'd like to just add one quick thing. As you understand with economic development, we're always talking about per capita income. When you go, you say that this is the 3 or 5 is the big number of per capita income, and you divide it by the population. This is where Pakistan stands. This is what I was trying to tell the Chief Justice. You don't only look at income as a source of identification of a country's growth. The main purpose, I think, is how efficiently you use water. As a country, if I want to go into a country and I want to see how developed that country is, I use Steve's curve. I want to see how much water is being used in agriculture. Countries which are highly developed, they use 60 to 70% of their water in agriculture. Countries which are poorly developed, they use 80, 90% of. So whenever you, with your tools and economic tools, you look at GDP, and then the first question we want you to ask is how much water is being used in agriculture. And when you want to look at the path of that country, you just go back and see how is it taking water and how is it allocating to those other 5 sectors I told you.
I was going to pick up on something that came up here. The first thing, in fact, that you said about the Colorado case is there's a couple of examples like river basins out there that are these sort of classic examples in how you get water trading and a price on water and how to make that happen. And the Murray-Darling is a great example, and then there's the Colorado River Basin, and they've made it work. There's these water banks, and it really works. At the heart of it is property rights. And so I wanted to ask, again, I keep asking you 2 questions. So I'm going to throw 2 questions at you guys again. So one is, okay, fine. So maybe the vision is something like the Murray-Darling Basin, right? Like that'd be great. I think it would be wonderful if we could manage something like that in Pakistan. But what's a feasible pathway there? And I think, and in answering that, the first step is property rights. How on earth are we going to get property rights in this context? What is a feasible pathway towards that kind of basin, developed basin where there's water trading and a price and property rights? How do we walk to that state? How do we do that?
It's basically embedded in your religion, your property rights. It's the law of inheritance. It's Muslim law of inheritance. You get, a person dies, this is bifurcated in this particular way. A lot of the rights which were bestowed are not bestowed by society or by culture. They are bestowed by an external power. I make you a Jagirdar, I make you a Thanedar, I make you some other Dar. Those were the part of the Dari system. So, there's a history to that. And every country, even the United States has a history. All of us have a history to that. So, in the end, and then you have an institutional framework. You have an 18th Amendment. As soon as water enters Guddu Biraj, it is no longer Pakistani water. It is the water of Sindh. Above Guddu Biraj, as it comes out of Tarbela, it comes out of there, these 5 rivers, it is a Punjab share of water. So you have an institutional framework which clearly says water is a provincial subject. It is no longer a federal subject as per your 18th Amendment. That complicates things. That really puts a lot of pressure in the Murray-Darling, in Colorado, and to some extent even in the South African case, which is a new case which is coming. You should study that one also. They were in total hell, and they were able to sort of manage that part. Many fewer farmers. You don't have inheritance like that. In the United States, you don't have that. In our system, the rights and entitlements. We talked about water earlier. I have a piece of land. I pump as much as I want, Steve. I don't ask you. Nobody's going to put a suit on me. I take out as much as I can. I'm not concerned what happens. In Balochistan, we've done a number of studies. The worst situation in the world right now, if you want to see how a crisis is created, is in Balochistan. 1 kilometer, you will have up to 18 tube wells. The law is there. You cannot exploit. There is a regulatory framework, there is a pricing framework, and there is also a electricity fixed price as well as basically the problem came because of a fixed price. They made it variable price. It makes no difference. You go to Pashin, you go to Kila Saifullah, you go to all the places. They have totally devastated that society. And the main reason is we were not able to have this, and it is the ownership of that land. Nobody comes and stops me. I put a pump wherever I want. I draw as much as I want. One Samal from your university, he made this point that, okay, why don't we go and put a meter on it like we do it on other things? Practically, yes, possible. I would ask him to go and try it out in some of these places, and maybe then we can do it on a pilot stage.
But that's what I mean. Like, what is the feasible way? I know there's resistance to measurement and resistance to pricing, and resistance to putting property rights. How do we do that in this case? Like, what's the feasible way forward? Is there a feasible way forward? Any thoughts on
it? It's going to take a long time. You have to go back to your legal system. And this is being talked about, by the way. It's being talked that how we... Bifurcation, I think one main thing is we don't put bifurcation in there. When you bifurcate property, we can put a value it and say that you take this much money as your share. But when you bifurcate it, that's where we get this large number of these small farmers, one after the other. I mean, 1 acre going to 5 and all. The feasible way, in my opinion, is to first academically study it. And what do you want out of it? Why do you want to do this? First, let's be very clear where we want to go. If it's efficiency, it is high value agriculture. If it's a vibrant economy, that's a different path. Right now, those things are, if Pakistan was to do that, Pakistan would not, as Steve is saying, we would not be growing wheat. We would not be growing some of the other crops. Once you identify that, I think the path automatically starts coming up. If you don't, then we will continue as we do continue, and we'll have all these sorts of customary rights. We'll all have our legal system. Go back and revise your 1840 documents on land manual. Those are the manuals which you use. The world has changed 150 years. We still use that land manual. Once you change it over there, you change the legal over there, I think it changes to a different mix. So that's the way forward is go to the legal. Iram Star made a good point last week. He said, God's sake, Chief Justice, change these manuals. They're 150 years old.
So just two things that you have to get right on pricing water is you have to be able to measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't really price it. And the second thing is you have to be able to exclude people from it. So if somebody isn't paying, then you have to be able to withhold it. And those two things are both very difficult in the current situation. So my sense on this is maybe you start at the more macro level. You get charges between provinces. Nobody's going to like it. I mean, I'll guarantee you that. But at least right now, there's a situation where Balochistan and KP are not using the water that they're entitled to under the accord. So it's getting used by Sindh and Punjab, or it goes out into the sea. So there is something that they're actually entitled to that they're not using. That's something that could be rewritten in the water accord to say that, look, if you don't use, if you're not using water that doesn't end up in the sea that one of the other provinces use, they should pay for it. I mean, that's a human invention, a human change. It's not impossible to do. We tend to have a feeling that touching the water accord is taboo, and with probably good reason, but some changes in the water accord could make some sense, and that might be a way to start dealing with some pricing of water. Then the provinces have to figure out how they're going to recover those charges. And IRSA actually already charges a very small amount to the provinces on the water they distribute. So the mechanism is there. Whether they would actually raise it is another question. But so there are different places to start. You can start at the watercourse level. You can start at the macro picture. None of them are really simple because there's a lot of rent seeking. There are people that have entitlements. But somehow between regulation and enforcement, you can change things and with the intent of getting better outcomes.
I'd just like to add very quickly. There is one piece of legislation called 161, Article 161 of the Constitution. I want you to read that. You always read 62 and 63. Read 161. And that will partly answer what Steve is proposing, and I think that's the direction which we should look at. 161 says that wherever a powerhouse is located on a river system on the Indus, that province, wherever the powerhouse is located, they will get all the royalty. But we are turning it around, we're saying that if water, the shares of water as per accord are given, 37% Punjab, 37% Sindh, 20 whatever for KPK, and then whatever is for Baluchistan. If you value it there, and there's a whole pot of money, that we said that we value all parts of water. It's agriculture value, it's hydropower value, it's flood control value, it's fish value, everything. That's an economic model. You value it there, then we can talk about that 37% that this is what it's worth. This is your share, this is what it's worth. Either I can write you a check. If you're not going to use it, Baluchistan, take the check. The other ones in that marketing system, they come in and say, we buy it out, okay?
Right.
We need that 6%, we take it from you, you just take your check and you can go. The valuation part is fundamental, it's very important.
Right.
And I think that's the direction which we sort of start off with the economic model, you start pulling it out, and there are the different ways, willingness to pay, willingness to accept, blah, 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 blah. There's a fair amount of economics in that one, so that's the direction.
Well, on that actually, so there's a couple of things. I know, Zehra, you have a prior commitment and you might need to leave in about 10 or so minutes. So I thought I'd shift gears a little bit. We've been talking about kind of macro and leaning into agriculture a little bit, but maybe we shift gears toward urban. Those are areas that you have worked a little bit in, and I've done a bit of work in as well. So I wanted to pose the question to you, and if you have any comments on the other thing, by the way, please feel free to. But I just wanted to let you know that I do want to get to urban because I feel like you'd have great ideas on that. So one question for you on urban was, the problem in this urban setting is, and we're experiencing it right now. There's there's 3 of us working on this project in Islamabad right now, and we're trying to get households to conserve water, which is all fine and good, but there's a huge problem that water isn't measured at the household level, right? So we're kind of stuck trying to figure out how much water these households are using and how to figure out if they've actually reduced their consumption. So how do we get to a point where we can, like natural gas and electricity are metered, how do we get to that point and how do we start charging a price for it? Like, will people resist or will they accept? What do you see? What do you see happening?
I think prior to you moving onto directly metering water and making it measurable and making sure that any household, for example, has only that one source of water, not another, whatever. I think a step before that needs to be at the institution level. Pervaiz just talked about the fact that after the 18th Amendment, the provinces are independent. So we did a small study related to all the institutions which are, interrelated. Once, like he said, Tarbela se pani aa jata hai, to kahan pe aata hai? We talked to VASAs, we talked to Saaf Pani Company, various institutions which are there, the municipal corporation, to make sure that you get safe potable water. And one thing we found out from that was the fact that they have little or absolutely no level of knowledge sharing, whether it is practice, whether it is trickling down of any policy, how they're acting it out, for example. Everything is happening in small little ghettos. So before we get to a point that we can give, we can present a single face to the consumer, we need to sort everything out at the institutional level.
What do you see as the big problem institutionally? When it comes to urban water, for example, what is the big issue? Why doesn't WASA or whoever it is, why aren't they doing a better job?
Because there's a lot of role replication to some extent. institutions are not sufficiently linked together in terms of holistically trying to engage with the consumer, serving the needs of the consumer. So the end user is left grappling with this chaotic, the scenario out there. So yes, eventually that would require, before metering, we need to see where the water is coming from, where it is being consumed. But in order to do that, our institutions need capacity building. They need to have some muscle in terms of being able to invest in infrastructure, for example, simple things like pumps, replacing pipes, because you send out clean water and it reaches your house contaminated with lead and God knows what else, because your sewerage pipes and the others are contaminated. So again, building up on the muscle power, well, that takes money, but apart from money, I think they need to start sharing. Knowledge sharing, creation of that new knowledge together, which would perhaps you guys would be a better position to actually propose what can be done. But I think that is one thing that is absolutely crucial that we need to do prior to actually engaging with things like metering and pricing water.
I'd like to quickly add, because since he is going to leave, just like the other utilities, like your gas, your electricity, I see very little problem with putting up a meter and charging for it. People everywhere, we've seen that in Karachi and other areas, they are willing to pay for water. Your problem comes on two types of water. First of all is segregating the market for water and its provision. One type of water is highly clean water, which is for drinking, highly valued. That is God-given right. This is a human right which the Supreme Court also recognizes. That access to that sip of water is your human right. That should be priced at a very low. Even if you make it subsidized as free, that's okay. That's your sip of water. Other domestic uses, it does not need that same quality of water which you're using over there. So bifurcate the market, maybe not 1 meter, but 2. For 1 meter, just charge 10 rupees. For the very, very poor, charge 10 rupees for it, But for the other, it does not have to be the highest quality of water. You want to go and pretty well clean your car. You want to go and use it for washing all your lawns and stuff like that. That's different. So I think segregate the market into two. Drinking water has to be provided free of cost. It's simply either free of cost or at a very highly subsidized rate. You don't do that. You go outside the precepts of the constitution, the religion, move towards that direction. For the others, you charge at whatever you can charge. Let me tell you what India is doing. India is, Steve, they have put in $2 billion. I was there about a year and a half back. $2 billion. They want to map each and every inch of Indian soil. They say, like you said, you measure, if you don't know it, where the scarcity is, and there is no averages. Where the area is scarce, the price has to be higher. Where the area is abundant, the aquifer is doing very well, there the price you can do differential pricing. So many opportunities, but if you want anybody wanting to talk to Imran Khan, this is what we need. We need to immediately put 400, 500, 1,000, whatever it is for the general use, and we need to discourage that. Like Australia, we are running into that problem. The Australian it would not take very long over that. But for the drinking part, I would strongly urge you in your models, be very cautious on that we would like to keep it, if not free, at a very, very low cost.
I was going to say, one of the one of the issues that we have is that we can't price water, and if you can price water, you can obviously regulate how much people use. Other things we can do in this current circumstance where we're not metered, where we're not pricing urban water to reduce water. There's this image in my head. Every morning when I drive out, there's this guy who's watering the driveway. I'm just like, what are you going to grow over there? And it's a prolific waste of water. And every house in Canada that depends, they're sprinkling their driveways. It's a massive waste of water because we don't pay for it. So what can we do is there something we can do to nudge households to not use as much? Is there something non-price we can do in your minds?
You can do conservation, you can do TVs, you can do many things. If you save 1 liter across the board, you save 220 million water. So Pakistan is big, the savings are also big. But unless you use the wrath of pricing some way, that responsibility doesn't come. If it's free, good, then you use it as you feel like. And then the related thing is the sources of water. Are you going to allow any Tom, Dick and Harry to go and install a pump in his house? If you are, don't start yelling that Lahore ka aquifer, this is what is happening to Lahore, this is what will, then don't yell about it. But if you're going to manage it, you're going to say, we're going to allow this, we're going to have 3 days moratorium that we're simply not going to allow you to wash a car. Car wash, start putting a tariff over there. All right, from tomorrow on, you pay 10,000 rupees to 15,000 rupees. You can only do 15 cars, 20 cars. It's not your free will. So some education, some advocacy, and on top of that, the instruments of economics. I think that's the direction we take.
If I could add to that, I'm not really, I'm not an economist at all. But the fact is that I think apart from pricing, there are other sticks that you can actually use. Things like morality, for example, what is right? For example, Pervaiz just mentioned the fact that, for example, clean drinking water is far more expensive to produce, to get to your households, yet it needs to be free of charge because that is your right. So when you have rights, you also have duties. We can also play a religious card, for example. The Prophet said, for example, that even if you're right next to a flowing river, you must not waste water from there. So there are things people do for morality, to see themselves in their own eyes, in the eyes of the community, of the family, as moral beings. I think we need to play that card as well. Money, pricing, that's not the only thing. I'll give you a crude example as well. I'm not quite sure badmash, what we'll call in English, but we normally say कि I'm going to use Urdu a little bit. We normally say कि इलाके के बदमाश को आप डंडा मार के या सख्ती करके सीधा नहीं कर सकते. उसको responsibility दे देते हैं कि तू leader है, तूने करना है. And it solves things because the role is changing. So I think there are other sticks and not just that of price that we can use in terms of changing how the consumer actually consumes. And like Pervaiz said, every drop, every liter, when you multiply that with that denominator that's reducing our per capita water, makes a huge difference.
And it's not the human beings only. When you're pricing water, you're valuing it. There are 50 other, all life. If you please look at SDGs,
Yes,
6 and SDGs 14 and 15. Look at Dawn, that gives the Pakistani perspective. I think 2 years back we put up some articles over there. You're not only worried about human beings, you're worried about the trees, you're worried about your dog, you're worried about the cattle, you're worried about a millennium of things. I can do anything without oil or without clothes on me. I cannot sustain life without water. That's one issue. So please look at the multiple use model. Water is not only for human beings, water has many other uses in the chain also.
Can I excuse myself now?
So Zehra,
With your apologies, I do have to leave, but it was a pleasure being here. A pleasure to meet both of you as well.
Steve, do you have any thoughts on the urban
This discussion reminded me of the things they have done in Colorado because water is scarce there, and there were days when you weren't allowed to wash cars, and so 2 days a week during drought-affected times you weren't allowed to wash your car or water your lawn. So there are these sort of moral, indicators that you should be conserving. The government also had they also required, there was legislation to require low flow toilets, low flow faucets and things like that, so that there was a whole set of, they were coming at it from all angles, not just from pricing. Then there was also tiered pricing, so if you used just a little bit, it was low, and then the prices went up if you used a lot. One of the things that was really interesting in this is that the golf industry, of course, if you know anything about golf courses use a lot of water. And it's very evident, right? Because they've got water, everything's really green and there's water irrigating all the time. And so they got into a lot of trouble because actually the water that they use goes to quite high value. And so they were trying to defend themselves, in the end successfully, I guess, because they kept using water. But you get into these situations where everybody's saying, well, look at these stupid golf courses. They're using all this irrigation water, where in fact they were using it for a fairly high productivity use. So I think it is way beyond pricing. There are all kinds of ways to come at it. People have tried them. They do tend to work up to a degree. But there's still water theft in Australia. There's still water theft in the U.S. It doesn't go away. But you can make it better, and you can convince people to try to conserve water as well.
Absolutely. I think enforcement is definitely part of the mix. And I remember there's a mentor of mine once said that most people are not malicious; they're just lazy or poorly informed. So for the most part, if you do set up an institution, people will follow its norms and the laws. But of course, there's got to be some enforcement in there as well in the mix.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you do it like India, but it simply says, Delhi says that water is your business, I can simply not provide it. That's another way of doing it. I simply just put my hands up. I can't. So you start going for rainwater harvesting, you start putting blabber, small tanks over there, you start saving water. If you love too much gardening, you bloody well save your water during the monsoon. For those 3 months, we don't have a problem. So I think that rainwater harvesting should be one area where we should encourage, particularly for a place like Lahore. There's no reason why we get extensive rain over here. During that period when there is abundance, we should be able to save that water. And when there is scarcity, people should get into the habit of using it. And I still go back to the economics. That principle of putting a higher price will force people to also start investing and saving in that water. If the price is very marginal, who cares?
So I was just going to say, I think we're due to open this up to the audience now, and but before we do, and I kind of mistimed that. I wish Zehra was still here, but I would just like your sort of last 10 seconds on what you think, what in your mind is the big challenge for water in Pakistan, and what do you see happening? What's the feasible pathway? So just a quick thought on that from both of you, please, before we open it up to the audience. So Steve, maybe you can start us off.
Sure. I mean, if we need a soundbite here, right? A bumper sticker level of things. So I mean, it's
Yes.
My bumper sticker is water sharing, and I think that going forward, there's so much uncertainty as to where demand's going to be, what kinds of products, even in agriculture or otherwise, where the successes and where the challenges are going to be, and on top of that, it's the environmental side that one of the demanders, one of the clients is the environment, and more is going to have to go to the environment. So mechanisms to sharing water, I think, need to be, a lot of attention needs to go to those, so that if you're not pricing things, at least you're somehow assessing institutionally the scarcity, so that water moves to the highest and best value insofar as you can do it. I mean, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. Everywhere we have a tendency to sort of come up with a program that saves water for a certain group or allocates it, and then you get rent seekers, and the institution gets very rigid, and you can't change anything for years. So you need to really work on the idea of how are we going to make it so that water can move around to what's inevitably a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen to the glaciers. We don't know we're going to get a rise in water maybe and then a big decline later. That was my number one pitch.
Great.
My quick 3 takes on that. First of all, I think is the quality. I don't think we're going to run out of water. We're going to just run out of quality water. If you want to put your money, that's one area you put your money on it. The other is the broader paradigm of water. If you do not develop a water security, some countries on the side are going to overtake you. Let me give you a quick example. Pakistan's current per capita income is around 16 or 1700 US dollars. India is very similar to that. You do not take care of water in this year, which you're talking about 2045, 47, India's GDP will be something around 44,000 US dollars per capita. Pakistan's about 6,800. That is the length which your neighbor wants. These fundamental in that whole equation is water. And always don't keep looking to the glaciers, don't look at the mountains, don't look at the flows on the Indus. Start looking towards the Arabian Sea. You have 1046 kilometers of coastline. Start looking at that. That's an infinite supply. When people yell at me on Karachi, I give them a recipe. I said, put in 1 billion US dollars, $330 million for one desalinization plant, put 3 of them, Karachi does not need to scream anymore. And lastly, The economic development model which I am proposing, in which water becomes fundamental, is 5 cities on the coast. Pakistan is not going to be able to, you youngsters cannot survive in Lahore only. There are not going to be that many jobs. Go out towards the Middle East modern, look at that 1046 kilometers. It's not only Gwadar. I give you 5 more sites. That is the future 47 and 2100 for Pakistan.
Good. Thank you very much. So, we'll take questions from the audience.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is to Dr. Pervaiz Amir. So you said that we have 2 dams currently and we're building 2 more, right? So the question is that, and you said that the additional dams are going to replace the previous water. The question is that, do we really need these dams, or is it imperative for us to build these dams, or would the thing get better? And what did the entire panel say about this, and what did the Chief Justice say, and why there is a lot of controversy behind these dams? Why do people oppose it?
Okay. All right, we have a writer on that question.
So there's a report by Asian Development Bank that says that the estimated cost of this the Amir Basha Dam, it's about $14 trillion. And if
14
every
billion.
yeah, 14 billion. So if every Pakistani gives like $100 like for the next 1 year or 2 years, it will take approximately like 50 years to reach that target. So from an economic point of view, is it viable?
Okay. So there's should we build and is it viable? And then there was a question over here.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about rainwater harvesting. So I'm an architect, and I want to know if this sort of a solution, yes, exactly, a solution to the problem, would it come from architects and engineers to actually create these systems, or would we need to start importing these products to make it more mainstream? Because this is something that we've heard about, but it's not a technology that you easily find. And I don't think our plumbers or our water sanitation engineers who work on households especially have that knowledge. And even when you talk about rainwater recycling, it's also gray water recycling. So I think those two could be used in conjunction, but where do we start with that?
Ali, do you want to cap us off with the last question?
So I just wanted to ask you to please distill your thoughts. I know we've had all of you touch upon this, including Zehra earlier, on how the world will look different in 2047. And so just to spur that, one way in which I can think of something that isn't here yet, but is on the cusp of being here, is the Internet of Things becoming much more prevalent, becoming commoditized. And so you'd expect that, for example, taps might be smart, and so every tap across the country might be smart in the next 20, 30 years. And so that might reduce our requirement for water. But do you see anything else on the horizon? So to quote Donald Rumsfeld, the known unknowns, right? Things that we know, we don't know, but also known knowns in the sense that this is stuff we know is likely to happen soon. Thanks.
You want to take a shot at that?
I'll take shot at 2 and then I'll let Steve take it. This one on, let's take this first and then go back. On rainwater harvesting, this is fairly standard now. Yes, it is the architects, it is the engineers, that's where you start off with. That's an investment. It should not be a government investment. We should promote it. Since we have larger houses, we have surface area. If you go to Japan, they do a lot of that in Japan also. A lot of the agriculture which they do, the whole family's agriculture will be done in pots on the rooftop over there. Water harvesting, India is doing that. We need to move ahead in terms of redesign our, what we did was picked up from France, This model town was there, the French architects. They came out here and they said that this is the way you do the city and this is what you do. If we go to Islamabad, we go to Doxiadis, he says that this is the way you do a city. We need people to come back and say, okay, for a city we've done, now how do we harvest water? The traditional Mughal architecture always had canals in the system. If you go to Afghanistan, I go to Babur's mausoleum there, a lot of these canals. And what you do is, you had one canal and you are even after that canal, you want to wind that up. So, whatever you get in 3 months, it will be very intense. From climate change, I can tell you, it will be hell. When it rains, it will rain like it is bringing death to everybody. but it will rain very little. I mean, the spread will be very little. This is what climate change science is telling us. So please gear yourself up. The storages you will need for that, where do you want to store that, and whether you want that. That's the purest water, by the way. How much of it will you want for drinking? How do you want to do your grey chores, with your lawn and that and that. So I think an incentive there, a big push from the advocacy, that's the way forward. And you people, there are umpteen models. Please look at those. Now to the easier question on dams. We started off in 2004-05. I worked on Kalabagh at that time with John Briscoe and a whole very celebrated team, about 10 scientists. And we were at the verge, Steve, where we were going to get a signature. Put up the documentation, the loan, everything was ready. We were about to get a signature. It went through the motions, general agreement, and then one fine morning, I get this boss of ours, he was the leader. He said, Amir, you and Murray-Darling Basin, Don Blackmore, these are the new files. Pack up this project and put it somewhere. The government of Pakistan does not want to proceed further with it. Cost at that time for Kalabagh was $6 billion. The cost of Bhasha Dam at that time was $8 billion. Right now, the cost of Bhasha Dam is $14 billion, most likely going to $16 or $17 billion. Dams are never constructed at the cost which you initially budget. Remember that. This whole problem, how do we do it with crowdfunding? We are not going to do it with crowdfunding, my friends. That is the peanut part. That is just the involvement part. What is the total amount of money we've got? We got 6.5 billion rupees up till now. That's what was announced. You don't build a dam at 6.5 billion rupees. We need something like 1400 billion rupees or 1600 billion rupees for that. There is a financial model which gets used. You need the first cost is 20% cost which you need is to purchase land, compensation which you need to pay. We have already done that. 90% of the land for that dam has been purchased and paid for. Okay, so that part is there. The next 20% is that cost. Then the next 35% of the cost is the construction of the dam. It has a component. The first one is local component. That is only rupees. You don't need money from outside. The other component is local component and foreign component. 35, 40, whatever that comes to. That you take loans. We can take loans. We can generate. We can do bonds. We can do many things. My proposal on that is rebundle CPAC. Like Mathar is doing in Malaysia. We don't want all those roads on which nobody rides. We don't want some of the projects which the Chinese might like, but we really don't have a need for that. Small amount of rebundling is possible over there. That is one option. I go into the market tomorrow evening, you get that money. There is an interest rate to it. The dollar component is very little. The rupee component is heavy. Rupees, we are not worried. We do not need all that money year one. I need to spread this money over a 10 or 12 year period. So it comes down to roughly $1 billion per annum. So everybody gets worried, where do you get all this money? This $100 will do this. That's not the situation. So that spread is there. The last component, which is the 30% component, that is the foreign exchange component, exclusive foreign exchange. That's where you buy your turbines. There is something called buyer's credit. I go to Siemens, I go to Philips, I go to the US GE, I go to any one of them. They are willing to give me those turbines on a fast-track repayment system. See, once a turbine is installed, the money starts pumping up. So really start making money very quickly. So dams are very economical investments, heavy investments, but they're very economical investments. So please don't take this message about crowdfunding. This is just one model, and it came out of basically this other country, I think Ethiopia. Look at the Ethiopian model. They tried that, but their financing was very small. It's only $4 billion. I am a country of a lot of people. Let me give you part of what it means, macroeconomics. Our GDP is $305 billion. 14 billion out of that, somebody has calculators, 5.67, I think it should come to that. 5.67 part of my $3 or $5 billion. So even if I took out 20 billion, I wanted to put it up today, it's only 5%. But since I'm building this dam over a 14-year period, I am talking about something like 0.67 to 0.7, depending on the exchange rate, 0.7% of my total GDP. That's the expenditure outlay. So money part we've thought through very carefully. I don't think I'm too much worried. The bankers we spoke last week, they think it's peanuts, it's not big money, you know. So please don't take it that they're going to put the whole nation into this. That's not the record. The whole idea was crowdfunding was not your financing, that you're putting money into. It is just to see the response. I mean, do you take it as a national project? The other thing which we can do right now is for those people who are going to give money in the dollar from the United States, from other countries, there are a lot of people who are chipping in. I am asking the Chief Justice of Pakistan, please let's put up an incentive scheme for that. I issue a bond. If you give me $20,000 today, I give you a 25% return in after 14 years or 13 years on that. If you want to buy a purchase bond, I give you a security, I pay for that. So there are very different mechanisms for financing. It is not as complicated as we think. And for dams, 1.4 trillion US dollars is invested in hydropower every year. That is the outlay internationally. You go to the banks, you go to the World Bank, sort of moved away from it, but the money is there for this type of project. And they've been fairly well thought through. I think this one, Munda Dam has a $750 million component for Munda, which is smaller, about 5 billion US dollars. That has a 750 million loan from, I think, ADB. That part has already been negotiated. So I think from after 2-3 weeks, we start going full gas on those two projects. And I think they're vital for Pakistan. They're not vital for us. I will not be around. They're vital for your future, your kids' future. This one, as well as the one in, we are trying very hard to renegotiate, to rework this one even on Column. It has some hiccups, it has some resistances. They will only take place when this question the gentleman was making over there from the lower delta. If it's a problem amongst brothers, we can solve the lower delta. You know, if it's giving extra water, 10% less sugarcane, give it to the delta. There are ways to go about it. That is the macroeconomic thinking, the macroeconomic dream which you need. If Pakistan did not have Tarbela, where would you be? You would be nowhere. Simply be nowhere. If India did not have Bhakra and later on Narmanda, India would be nowhere. In that report which I mentioned, go look at the benefits, economic benefits. Main thing is to share them widely. Don't share it only in that project area, share it across the river. I think that's the way forward for Pakistan. If you want to touch on, there is one other which came out here, you know.
25 years ago, when I was looking at the future, I didn't get any of this right. I mean, it's just the innovations that have gone on in the last 20 years have been just astounding. I think, and a lot of it obviously on the electronic side. And I couldn't even speculate really what I could imagine or what might the scenario be then. But I guess the one thing that really add to this kind of smart sensors and all that, the kind of more biological side of things, the kind of things that they're going to be able to do with smart membranes and that kind of thing, I think it will be something that will probably be as dramatic as the electronics stuff that we've seen so far. But I'm not a futurist. I don't know whether I'll be around anywhere near that, but I think it will be remarkable stuff. And it will be, I think, helpful to situations like Pakistan, but I couldn't be really that specific. Just on the dams, just sort of, we have done economic calculations on dams, and the Dimer Basha had sort of an internal rate of return of 11 to 12%, pretty good return on your money. It tends to be more than 50% hydropower when you do these things, so that hydropower component of it is very important. The only thing, I think that when you think dams, you have to think about what are the systems surrounding it at the same time. Because if you build a dam just to irrigate more subsidized wheat in the Rabi season, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. If you begin to think about all the broader things you can do with it, then it's great. And what that means is you have the institutional structure and the incentives set up so that you get the value out of these things. I think the tendency is to have too much of the same old stuff, and so you say we need more water in Rabi. Well, what are we getting out of Rabi season now? Let's make sure we get better things out of it. I guess that's kind of my main comment there. And again, I think I wish you luck with rainwater harvesting, and I'm sure that all these advanced technologies will be very helpful in that. I think in the UAE and places like that, they're looking at these sorts of systems quite a bit. So I think there are examples, they're probably high cost, but there are examples that can be, well, there's no rain there, but I mean, it's systems of using gray water and very effectively and things like that. So I guess the end on an economics point, it always is helpful if you have incentives to collect the rainwater. And so that's if you're pricing urban water at some reasonable value, then there's more of an incentive to do that, and people will do more creative things.
I'd like to add quickly two quick points. My two takes on that one is water testing. Bring in the science. Water testing, as Steve is saying, if I want to check my heart rate, I can do it with this small phone. Make it available to each and every Pakistani. I don't want to go to a lab. I cannot go to a lab for a water test. Simplified, that's where there are already models there. Simplified, anytime I want to say that what I'm drinking, is this worth drinking? I should be able to test that. The other technology which I think will come very heavy into both our measurements at the Indus Basin level as well as at in the urban area is going to be drones. I'm going to see these drones everywhere flying out of here, taking measurements, taking snapshots, telling you it rained and here's where the water is. I think that's going to be the future part. Lastly, I'd like to just add to what Steve was adding. If you do a $14 billion project on a dam, there is no harm to put $2 billion on making agriculture efficient. You have 10 years. This dam will take 10 years. This is the time to invest. This is what the pleading is to the Chief Justice. Please arrange also for some money so we use first-class water. This is very expensive water, which you're going to store. Use first-class water to first-class agriculture, not first-class water for third-class agriculture. Secondly, do 3 projects on the Indus to make it palatable. Project number 1, below Multan, put up a facility to clean that water. What we are sending to Sindh is absolutely dirty, junky water. We need to clean it over there. Number 2, put a regional development project in this area, which was my friend was saying over there under below Kotri. Let's try to get our act together. We put up some money there, which may be $200 million, $300 million. That's not big. Lastly, there are only one place in Pakistan where people are dying. No other place people die. That is Tharparkar. We have a canal system which we would like to pick out of the Indus on the rainy. We take that canal and we get rid of this problem. I'm going there next week, by the way. We get rid of this problem. It is so painful to, whenever you go there, this children is dying, that is dying, people are dying because of famine. Pakistan does not need to face that music. India has already set it up at Rajasthan. We need to do the parallel investment. So during this 10 years period, I think that is also a side way forward for Pakistan to move. Yeah.
All right. Well, oh, sorry. Yeah, Iman. Well, I think we should wrap up. Thank you to our panelists and thank you to the audience for participating. Thank you very much.